In my previous video, I mentioned that I only had one ride cymbal. Embarrassingly, I only own one ride cymbal. Hang on, do I really only have one ride cymbal? I guess I have one more. I actually completely forgot that I have this ride cymbal, which was my very first ride, and the story behind this is I was panicking before my first ever studio recording, and I needed a bright bell sound, and I didn't own any ride cymbals. I think I only owned like 1 or 2 cymbals at that point in time. Maybe 3. I don't know. But I didn't have a ride, and so I went on Carousel like any broke student would, and I looked for everything that was available, and lo and behold, there was a 20-inch A Custom ride. A Custom, I thought, should have a bright bell, and it did kind of have a bright bell. So this is a 20-inch A Custom ride, and those of you who are OGs on my channel might remember seeing a couple of my very first drum covers played on this ride cymbal. Nowadays, I usually use... Who am I kidding? Nowadays, I always use the Zildjian 21-inch K Organic ride, which is my favorite so far, with a super bright bell but a drier body. You guys will have seen that in all of my recent videos. You might have seen about 2 other ride cymbals. At one point, I played a Tony Williams ride, and I also played the Carmine Appice rock ride, which was a... It was a chunk of metal, I will say, but it had a really classic sound. Anyway, those 2 ride cymbals were borrowed and have since been returned to their owners, so I really only have 2 ride cymbals. But I digress. This video is really not about the story of all the rides I've played. Actually, what happened is after I posted that clip in which I said I only had one ride cymbal, my friend Michael from Retrobeats, who distributes red cymbals in Singapore, contacted me asking if I could review a couple of their ride cymbals. And that brings us to the present, where I have 4 red ride cymbals with me here. Let me just show them to you briefly. Starting with the traditional series, which is a really shiny cymbal. It's lathed on both sides with light hammering, and that's pretty much all you expect a normal cymbal to look like. Then we also have the traditional dark, which from the top looks exactly the same as the traditional, but it's got a bit of a surprise at the back. The back is unlathed and just hammered, looks like what you would expect a more dry and dark cymbal to look like. So this is a kind of interesting 2-in-1 surface. And then I also have the vertical raw, which is kind of like what the dark cymbal looked like on the back, but both sides, with a raw bell, as you can see. And finally, we also have the vertical light ride, which I figure is a slightly thinner version, and it's got a little bit more hammering in it. You can see some circular marks in the surface of the ride, and that's supposed to give it a slightly darker tone and possibly a faster decay. But we will find out about that shortly, because I'm going to be doing a sound test for all 4 of these rides. I'll also be including sound clips from the 2 rides which I do own, which are both Zildjian cymbals, the 20-inch A Custom ride, as well as the 21-inch K Organic ride, because I'm also really curious how these cymbals will sound when recorded in the same conditions and compared back to back. Let's get started with the sound tests. Before I continue to share with you my thoughts on these cymbals, let's try a little bit of a blind test together. I recorded a couple samples of the bell, bow, and the edge of the ride, and I'm gonna let these play without showing you which ride is being played, and you can just remember which number of the ride cymbal you thought sounded the best to you, and see which of these rides is your favorite based on just hearing them and not looking at the rides themselves. I hope that was an interesting exercise for you to be able to hear your own preferences without any biasness of knowing what the cymbal was beforehand. And I must stress that once again, all the comments I'm going to make are just based on my own preferences. It is perfectly fine, and in fact, yours should be different for the most part, unless we just happen to have similar musical tastes. So that being said, let me give you my thoughts on these cymbals, but first starting with a comment on my original ride, the A Custom Organic ride, which stands out from all of these rides because it is 21 inches while the rest of them are 20. To me, this sounds very different from all the other cymbals, especially in the bow sound when I'm using the tip of the stick to hit it, because it is extremely dry compared to all of these other cymbals. Especially the red rides, they are very crashable, they open up very nicely and are super washy. The A Custom Organic also has a fairly clear bell tone, although overall it's very mellow because it is a darker sounding and drier cymbal. Dryness just means there's very little sustain, as opposed to a washy cymbal like the red rides. The most similar looking one in the collection was definitely the vertical raw ride, and that one I actually really liked the sound of in terms of the complexity of the tone, and it was again very crashable, but the bell was just a little bit too dull for my liking, and I would probably use this cymbal for a crash instead. The other vertical cymbal that I got was the vertical light, and this one's a very unique cymbal. There's a really cool hammering pattern on it, which I will try and show you a close-up of. It looks a bit like an asterisk. There are these extra circular hammering lines along the surface of the cymbal. But this one felt a bit strange to me in terms of the stick rebound. It just wasn't rebounding enough, probably due to a combination of the hammering and the fact that it's a thinner cymbal. The wash was very nice, but the stick sound was not as articulate, and I just couldn't get over that feel of the stick tips not being able to bounce as much as I would have liked. And that brings us down to the two traditional cymbals, the standard traditional ride and the traditional dark, which has the reverse hammered side. Let me just get that. This traditional dark with the back that is unlathed is definitely my favorite of these four. These two have a very similar sounds, the two being the traditional and the traditional dark. The traditional ride has a slightly higher pitch, and the traditional dark is a little more mellow, a little lower in pitch, but I realized that it had a slightly brighter bell than the traditional ride, and I liked that a lot. The traditional ride is a bit more sparkly, sits on top of the mix, and both of them are decently washy, I would say, but the dark ride to me had a bit more definition. So I would say this was my favorite of the lot. I kind of wish that they made this the opposite way, like if the unlathed part was on the top and the lathed part was on the bottom. Like, I think that would look so much cooler. It's probably just my personal aesthetic. I have no idea how it would affect the sound, but that would also solve the problem of getting too many stick marks. This one's not too bad actually, but the vertical light ride especially picks up stick marks like a beast, and I feel the need to like wipe it down after I play it every single time. Maybe it's just because they're new and I don't like making marks on new stuff, but one good thing about having unlathed cymbals is you can't really see the stick marks on them, and the more bashed up and weathered they get, the better they look. So it's a win-win. And I realized I forgot to talk about the A Custom. I keep forgetting about that ride, even though it was my first ever. The A Custom ride is like any A Custom cymbal, really bright. I do love the bell. I give that bell full marks for belling like a good bell should. But the rest of the ride is quite pingy, and although it washes out nicely, it's a very high-pitched, shimmery sort of wash. It's very thin sounding, I would say. It doesn't have a lot of body, which might be what you need in a mix, but for the most part, that's not the kind of ride sound that I'm looking for, and that explains why I never use it these days and have completely forgotten about its existence. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, ride. Here, let's give it some screen time to soothe its wounded feelings. There. I hope you've enjoyed this little tone comparison with me. This is the first ever comparison video on cymbals I've done because I am not a gear kind of person and generally don't own enough interesting things to make a worthwhile comparison on. But let me know if you'd like to see more of these kinds of videos. I'm definitely very curious to hear what your favorite of this bunch of sounds was. And once again, thank you to Michael for loaning these ride cymbals to me. I'm just gonna go jam on them for a while before I have to return them. But this brings us to the end of this video. Thank you for staying to the end. Happy drumming, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.